qualitative says, I would like to understand the meaning of what I'm trying to do. And that's why we felt that because qualitative is so important for the social studies as well as for the studies in education and change, that we would like to dedicate a summit to it. Now, my presentation this morning is brought to you by the concentration formerly known as ISACO. ISACO has now been renamed in a far more sexier title, Media Technology and Innovation. And what we try to do within, and Fred Steyer and I have the privilege of being the lead faculty on that. I hope Fred is joining us through the Zoom as well today. We truly believe that when we talk about social change, it is quite impossible to address that without taking media and technology and innovation into account. There is no form of human enterprise today that is not in some way or form affected by media and technology, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's in the public sector, whether it's in our communities, whether it's in international relations. Look what happened in Libya. Look what happened in the Middle East. Look what has continued to happen in China. Social media are driving social change, just as social media are changing the way we work, we live, and we interact with others. So MTI is going to the new buzzwords. People always ask me, what is ISACO? Is that something on a sushi menu? Well, now we have an acronym, hopefully that will resonate more. So the world we are living in has changed tremendously. And that's going to be the subject of my little talk this morning, because while I am a humanities person, I also have been very active in media for the last 35 years of my life. I stood at the birth of various digital technologies. I have the dubious distinction of having produced the first interactive laser disc in the world, which was released in 1982. It was called Van Gogh Revisited. It was the first commercially released interactive medium, and it actually did very well. It was released by the Criterion Collection, which, as you probably know, is a collection of very high-end motion pictures. And you can still find it on eBay, believe it or not. If you have a player, that's even harder. I'm not sure if you can find laserdisc players. But from that point on, I moved into digital media, CD-ROM, CDI. And so today there is a proliferation of all these incredible technologies that promise to change our world. For me, what's important is that the most dominant formats in this whole digital media pantheon is YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And it's not an accident, because all of these formats are driven by images, right? Now, there is such a thing as in human psychology as exceptionalism. I'm not sure if the term is familiar to you. It projects the idea that our age is different from the preceding age. And this is something that when you look at history, and as a historian, I'm fascinated by those ideas that, oh no, we're different from everybody else. You know, the Victorian age believed it was very, very different from everybody else. It stood at the summit of human achievement. And so do we. We truly believe that with all the technologies around us, we are unique. And I tend to disagree. And so what I'm going to try to do in the next half hour or so is throw some challenging puzzles at you to see if you can try to unravel what's happening with these images, because that to me is really the best approach to grapple with media and technology in your qualitative research. What is this? Who can tell me what this is? Very good, sir. Let's go. This is one of the earliest representations of human creativity, of human expression. The grotto in Lascaux in France, which is dated. There has been in the literature another debate that just broke out, but let's just say 15,000 BC. That's a pretty long time ago. Okay, this is only about 80,000 years after man emerged as Homo sapiens. And what do you think is happening on this wall? I mean, did cave woman tell caveman, you know, I don't like the wall in my bathroom. Can you just decorate that a little bit more? What's happening with this picture, do you think? Who can tell me that? And I have a prize, by the way, right here. Oh no, that's for the next puzzle. What are we seeing? What are we seeing? Well, they're, yeah, horses. They're, we're not quite sure what they are, but clearly what we're talking about is, hmm? Yes, okay, you already saw this presentation, so you know better. Be quiet, Heidi. What I'm trying to tell you is that we are conditioned because we use media so much. We use television, we use motion pictures. And looking at a picture as an instant snapshot, our eye can sees this as an instant snapshot captured from a series of motion picture images. Whereas in truth, this is a serialized series of images that project the unfolding drama of a hunt. We, because we're so conditioned by TV, can no longer see that. But for the caveman, what he did is he projected what he would think would happen tomorrow when he goes out there with his buddies and chase whatever these animals are, because obviously that's how they sustain themselves. So what you see are a dramatic unfolding of different events culminating in the capture of the herd so he can feed his family. That's what's happening here. Okay, let's take a look at this picture. What's happening here? What is your first reaction? There's a lot of things are happening. People are moving about, looking at up, down, fighting with each other. It seems to be a very large a group of people are doing different things. The medieval viewer saw it differently because, again, the medieval viewer is not conditioned by the instant freeze frame. So what this is multiple scenes in a story. This is about Moses. This is in the Sistine Chapel. Nobody ever sees this because how many of you have been to the Sistine Chapel? Okay. What do you do when you come into the Sistine Chapel? Look up, that's right. So you miss these beautiful paintings that were painted on the side. So here's Moses. He kills the overseer. Then he flees from Pharaoh. He comes to the well. That's where he meets Zipporah. He marries Zipporah, goes to Mount Sinai, takes his shoes off, is confronted with God in the burning bush. God tells him to free his people, and there he goes, leading the people out of Egypt, out of bondage. Now, you probably would not have imagined that because, again, you're conditioned to see it as one cohesive frame. But the medieval artist didn't think that way. He was completely comfortable with seeing individual moments in one frame of time and reference. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the way we perceive images is conditioned by our experience. Here's another wonderful example. What's happening here? A bunch of girls came together for cocktails and gossip. That's exactly what's going on here, by the way. Just obviously a very affluent family. The lady of the house is entertaining her girlfriends, and they're, you know, fanning themselves and listening to music and being served by this servant girl. What I'm trying to show you is that the Egyptians developed a metaphor for representing the human body. And they did this by changing the position of the body as they move from bottom to top. For example, the feet and the legs are shown laterally. The torso is shown in front, en face, as we say. And yet the face is once again shown in profile, with the exception that the eye is shown as if you're again looking at a person en face. You see the conflict there. Now, clearly, this style of painting went on for 3,000 years. 3,000 years, even though the Egyptian sculptor and sculpture in Egypt is tremendously accomplished, knew very well that if you look at a person from the side, there is a foreshortening effect of the torso. There is a foreshortening effect of the eye and the nose, and yet the artist persisted in basically depicting the human figure in a way that was anatomically wrong. We call that cognitive dissonance. The idea that what you see is not correlating with the way you tend to represent things. And that is, again, an example of how we are conditioned to see things around us. Here's one final example, and then there will be a little prize. Look at this here. What is this? Who knows what this is? What does this represent? The Last Supper. Very good. For a moment there, I was facing a bunch of heathens, but that's not good. And you can see that the artist here, the primary challenge of the artist here is to represent everybody, because he knew there's 13 guys sitting around a table. And so he has absolutely no regard for spatial illusion. He doesn't care about spatial illusion, because in the Middle Ages, spatial illusion wasn't a factor. What was important, that you represented the people who, according to the Gospels, are sitting around this table, and there's a mere indication of a cabinet there and maybe something of a wall, but these are mere attributes. There is no intent whatsoever to create a true spatial illusion, because the artist simply not only lacked the technology to do so, but didn't care. It wasn't about creating the illusion that what you're seeing is a real extension of your experience. It is simply a two-dimensional flat surface. And so imagine the shock when Leonardo da Vinci created this. Now for us, we are so, I call it the Mona Lisa effect. We have seen so many depictions of this painting that it is very difficult for us to capture the incredible revolutionary change that this painting represents. For the first time, using the technology of linear perspective, that is to project all the converging lines in a painting to a common vanishing point, that is the technology of linear perspective developed by Brunelleschi, to create a painting that no longer looks like a flat surface. It looks like a darn window on another room. Now imagine the medieval viewer who had never seen that, who had always looked at paintings as flat surfaces, to come in this room. And if you've been to Milan, you will know that Leonardo took into account the level where you're standing. And so when you come in, you look at this and, oh my God, it is as if there is truly another reality beyond the wall. That was the great challenge and the incredible technological revolution that Leonardo brought to this particular. So what I'm trying to say is perception is all about your brain. When we look at media, light enters the eye and goes through our optical nerve, but the real action is happening in our brain. And what we are doing in that brain is the result of thousands of years of conditioning. That is what's going on. So when you look at media, television, whatever the case may be, start with that just in the pure act of perception, we are being conditioned. Now, there are various theories about that. One theorist I'd like to identify believes that that particular perception, that stuff that happens in our brain when we look at images, is the aggregate of various symbols and motifs. We call that iconology. Iconology is an incredibly important theory. If you're interested in more the theoretical parameters of media, the key person there is our friend Aaron Panovsky. One of the first books I read on this subject back in the 1970s when I got involved in this thing. And so what Panovsky is saying is that the identification of an interpretation of images is all based on our cultural conditioning. We are a product of our age in terms of the social, political, and economic parameters. So all of the values that our age has imbued us with will determine how we interpret those images. And he calls that 3 strata of meaning. 3 strata of meaning. I think it's very useful for a moment to pause with that, because that really tells us how we should go about by interpreting the images around us. Here again, we go back to our wonderful fresco. This actually is after the restoration that took 20 years. This is what it looks like in Milan, the Last Supper. And actually, what is there is only about 20% of what Leonardo painted. Only 20% of the tempera is still there. But So Panovsky says there are really three layers of meaning. The first layer is principle, character, and action. What do we see here? Well, if we follow Panovsky's theoretical model, we would say the first layer of interpretation is there are 13 people sitting around a table having a meal of some sort, right? They're sitting there and they're obviously, there's bread, there's dishes. That is the first layer of identification. The second layer of identification is the iconological identification. Who are these people? What do they represent? Well, if you know your Gospels, this appears to be a depiction of the Last Supper. The 13 individuals, the 12 individuals on either side of the central figure are the apostles. And the person in the middle is, of course, Jesus. Okay, that's the iconological level. The third and highest level is the heuristic emphasis. What does it mean? And there now we begin to interpret, we begin to analyze it. And you can say, well, what is different about this depiction from the depiction we saw previously is that the figures are backing away from Jesus. They're backing away. Very unique. You won't see that in any other depiction of the Last Supper from that era. They're sort of like Jesus being isolated, and there's a maelstrom of emotional stress swirling around the figure of Christ, and that is because he has just said the words, one of you is going to betray me. And that incredibly emotional moment is what Leonardo has captured here. So you can see, in order to truly interpret imagery, Panovsky says, we need to break it down into three levels of meaning. Now, another important person who sort of followed up on that talks about motifs. Motifs are symbols, are narrative symbols that, again, are conditioned by our cultural milieu. And of course, we're talking about the German philosopher Ernst Cassirer, whose works is now in English also. The Philosophy of Symbolic Works is a source that I strongly recommend if you're interested in motifs. So on the one hand, we have the cultural conditioning of our era, and the other one, we have a whole series of attributes, of symbolic attributes by which we can interpret images. Here is a great example, okay? One of the first representations of something, of creative artifact that mankind made in the history of the world was a fertility symbol. Why? Because fertility was everything. Once humankind shifted from a destructive lifestyle, chasing herds, taking wild berries from trees, to a productive lifestyle, which was the domestication of wheat and the domestication of cattle, fertility became paramount, because if you're going to sit in one place rather than go around and hunt things, your harvest needs to succeed, otherwise you and your family will starve. So fertility became very important, and of course fertility was typically expressed in the female figure. Now, follow with me as we trace the evolution of this figure over 5,000 years. Okay, this is the earliest form I've been able to find. This is the 5th millennium BC. It comes from Mesopotamia, what is today Iraq, and it first morphed into the Sumerian goddess of Inanna. Notice that the position of the figure hardly changes. Inanna changed into the Babylonian figure of Astarte or Ishtar. That's how she enters the Bible as well. Ishtar then goes into the Greek domain and becomes Aphrodite, Aphros, foam, she who was burned from the fire. But you see that the figure stays the same. Aphrodite becomes Venus in the Roman era. Venus then is recreated in the Renaissance times by Botticelli, and it is in this exact same pose that she appears in a Victorian Secret ad today. So what I'm telling you is these are, according to Cassirer, now Cassirer didn't know the Victoria ad, that's what I added. But what Cassirer is saying, that these are motifs that are grafted onto our DNA. We can't escape them. And so as we interpret images around us, that is what is very much at work. So motifs said, Cassirer said, That is really what makes up our human experience. Now, here is another puzzle. And whoever wins this puzzle gets this preview. It's my newest book, Young Leonardo. This is not an ad, by the way. Young Leonardo is coming out in the middle of the summer. He is a preview. It's not printed very nicely, but it's for book critics. So whoever wins this gets this book, okay? What do we see here? We see two guys who have somehow gotten their girlfriends to join them in a park. One is strumming a guitar. And somehow they have persuaded their girlfriends to take their clothes off. Okay, this is Giorgione, La Fète Champêtre, which is, I guess, freely liberally translated, the picnic in the forest. Okay, do you see this? What is the meaning of this? Now, this painting hung in the Louvre all through the 19th century and was considered one of the finest works of Renaissance Italy. Nobody had a problem with it. Then in 1863, Edouard Manet, the French impressionist, he was an impressionist then, painted exactly the same. Two guys took their girlfriends to the park. One of them takes her clothes off. They're not strumming a guitar, but they're obviously discussing something. And this painting created the biggest scandal in the art world of the 19th century. People were horrified. 1863, the Salon. Manet was ousted, he was vilified, ripped apart in the press. Why is that? Why is this acceptable and this is not?
Because she's looking at the viewer.
That's a good one. That's part of it, but not quite the real thing. Because we have ones that are looking at the viewer. For example, the Olympic. Yeah, go ahead. Somebody.
I just started to say the context of the politics and the economical standards of that time.
That's true, but how is that made manifest? How do you see that? Because what is the difference between these two? When you're on the right track,
Right.
but how do you know that? How is that made visual?
The industry, the context of the distinction between the two, there's no economical context for the luncheon on the grass from Manet. So that was considered revolutionary because he was pushing the viewer into this intimate scene with no context of anyone else around them.
That's true, but the same thing is true here. Where is the? I mean, there is a very obvious thing, but you have to know you have to know the time in order to understand it. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The apparel, what they're wearing.
Yes, sir. You won the book. They're wearing the uniform of the students of the Sorbonne in the 19th century. So whereas this is clearly set in the past, in Renaissance costume, so now we think of it as, oh, okay, we're talking about Renaissance goddesses and gods. Nudity is okay. But here, you have to understand that what these guys are wearing is the costume of the Sorbonne students in the 19th century. So for us, it would be if these guys wore jeans and a t-shirt. And then, of course, the fig leaf of mythology is removed and you're thrust uncomfortably so in the real conditions of today. And now it's a scandalous picture because now it is of today. It is the industrial age, but it's the costume that makes it so. So, sir, you get the book. Okay. So what I'm trying to do with these little gimmicks is make you think about images and make you not accept what you see at first glance. That's really the point of the first part. So how do we investigate media then? As I said before, it is truly impossible to measure social behavior in purely quantitative terms. And that's why you're here, because you want to know about how to do things qualitatively. Media are products of individual creativity. You cannot measure creativity by strictly statistical methods. You need to understand artifacts in terms of their place in time, of their origin, and that cannot be done purely statistically. So Flick says that the other factor why we need to move towards more qualitative methods is because our society is becoming more diverse. How can you know that your quantitative sample captures that particular diversity? Very often when I chair a purely quantitative dissertation, I'm a little frustrated because whoever you get on SurveyMonkey is what you get. And is that sample on SurveyMonkey exactly what our society is about? You don't know that. So the traditional deductive methods of the idea of basically capturing a moment in time is simply not adequate to really penetrate what is going on with the research question that you would like to see answered. Now, I'm not knocking quantitative measures, but please understand, quantitative definitely has a major role in the way you go about pursuing your research question, but it cannot be the only element, because you may determine what, but you will never be able to determine the why. And in social sciences and in the humanities, it is the why that is so important for us. And so that's really why I think it is meaning that really is important for us in social media, and there are in social sciences, and there are many, many ways we can do that. By the way, the reason why I show you this spot is another example of why context is so important, because what this is simply a Minoan vessel showing dolphins from, it's about 2200 BC, and you might say, okay, interesting, what's the point? The point is that this vessel was found about 1,000 miles from its place of origin. And that shows that the trade contacts of Crete at that time, the Minoan civilization, was far larger than we had ever thought possible based on the technology, shipping that existed at the time. So context is so incredibly important to understand what everything is. So to me, there is really no difference between Twitter, a tweet, and this ostrakon from Lachish. Both have a story to tell. It's both a cri de coeur, as the French say, a leap from the heart. It's a story. That is what's important, and how it is delivered from it by a tweet or a piece of a potsherd or whatever the case may be is really not that important. This is an incredibly important thinker. He is the European Marshall McLuhan. So if we're talking about media and technology and innovation, it is really Barthes who said for the first time, it is all about meaning. That story and narrative have a place in our civilization wherever we may be, regardless of our religion, of our faith, of our background. We basically develop ourselves in narrative identity. And he said that in the 1950s, well before Marshall McLuhan became hot, and this book, Mythologie, or Mythologies, was only reviewed in the New York Times last year, believe it or not. It has taken that long for book critics to discover this man. But I was educated in Europe, so I read him back in the 1970s. An incredibly important source that challenges us to think about story as an identity not only of ourselves, but of the community in which we live. Mythologie, Roland Barthes. Another important thinker along that line took it one step further and said, if we create narratives, we are looking for ways to mediate it. A story is only operative when we can share it with other people. You know, what I find so striking is that all of the principal foundational texts that created civilization, whether you talk about Hebrew scripture or Homer's Iliad or the Ramayana in Asian texts, these all came together as stories told around a campfire at night, transmitted from one generation to the next as stories. And you know why? Because stories are far more reliable containers of information than the written word, whether it's on a on a tablet or a papyrus, piece of papyrus, because a story we remember. Why do we remember stories? Because stories have both emotional and cognitive factors. When we listen to a story, we begin to invest ourselves in it. We start to root for characters. That's why a story needs to have heroes and villains, so there is conflict. This is why we remember stories. I bet you can still remember stories that you were told as a child, whereas there are a lot of things that you were told as a child that you will never remember. And the reason is because the story resonated with you. It embedded itself in you. That is the power of narrative. And Connie, of course, is going to tell us a lot more about that later this morning. So Metz says in Le Signifiant Imaginaire that we are looking for ways to project that, And of course, the ultimate narrative machine is this. And now I'm sort of returning back to where we started. Okay. So you can see that in the evolution of understanding media, including artifacts and every form of artistic expression, we are basically being driven by the very, very same elements that we've had all along. For example, how many minutes do you think the average American, North American, spends looking at their smartphone daily? 60 minutes? 4 hours and 11 minutes. Okay, that's more than people watch television. So officially, the smartphone has replaced the TV. Here's another one. The number of people around the globe who check their smartphone at least 5 times per hour. That's every 12 minutes, right? How many people around the world check their cell phone, their smartphone, every 12, talk about compulsive behavior, 280 million. That's equal to the 4th largest country in the world. This is statistics that were just published a few days ago. We are witnessing a tremendous revolution in the way we behave with our narrative machines. And of course, the difference is that whatever we create right now can be boomeranged around the world instantly, and everybody, in theory, can see what it is that you're saying. Here are some more statistics that I just pulled off. This is from a 2015 Pew Research Center. 15% are now using the smartphone exclusively to serve the internet. 65% own a smartphone in North America. And get this, people are increasingly shifting their search behavior from the laptop to the smartphone. Of course, you probably knew that because you're one of the ones doing it. But when you look for a house, when you look for a partner, it's no longer the laptop. When you look for a car, not necessarily in that order of a priority, by the way, but people are shifting their behavior to the smartphone. And it's really shocking that so many technology companies, including Yahoo, including Facebook, that it took them so long to grasp that only in recent years have they become to grow their mobile division, because these people, once again, were conditioned to think in terms of the holy laptop. And so typically developments anticipate. Here's another wonderful thing. So you can see that texting and social media are by far the dominant ways in which you use the smartphone. And that productivity is just a tiny sliver of it. I'm not sure if Apple, realized that when they created the smartphone, but it is texting and social media that is by far the greatest. And this is all very fresh. Now, here's a very interesting book that was published just last month. Maybe you've heard about it. Are we better off? Sorry, that should be 2 Fs. I'm sorry. Are we better off? That's a very good question, isn't it? With all this tremendous technology that's going on, all these wonderful things that are happening in digital media and technology, are we better off as a society? So in this concentration, media, technology, and innovation, these are questions that we'd like to see answered. I've been involved with so many dissertations that use social media as, does it include increased productivity in the workplace, This is all good. But I'd like us to stay a little step back and look at the human condition. Have these technologies made us better off or not? And Robert Gordon, the author of The Rise and Fall of American Growth, which came out last month, says absolutely not. He claims that in the last 200 years, if you read the book, if not, I strongly recommend it. In the last 200 years, there have only been 6 truly breakthrough moments that made life better, easier. And they are electricity, the telephone, the internal combustion engine, mass production techniques, indoor plumbing, I like that one. Nobody wants to go out to the outhouse. Indoor plumbing, and the computer. A basta così, as we say in Italian. That's it. And of course, storm of protest in the media, in case you have been following it. Where is the smartphone? Where is social media? He says, look, productivity increased tremendously between 1920 and 1970, and there are various metrics that you can use for that. But from 1970 to today, the productivity growth has only been half that. Half that. And that, of course, also, he says the same thing is with inequality. Inequality, which of course was pretty bad in the coming out of the First World War. Inequality in America narrowed substantially, particularly after World War II, when there was a wave of prosperity, jobs, so forth. But since 1975 or 1985, that gap has been widening once more. So what the heck is going on? Why are technology and media not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing? You know, people have been saying, well, where's radio? Where's television? Where's the internet, digital video, smartphones, social media, artificial intelligence? Where is all that? He says, I don't care. He says, all these elements are just derivatives of the computer or derivatives of electricity, believe it or not. And you know, it's an interesting point. What he does is basically challenge our assumptions about media and technology and how they truly have an impact on the way we as human beings behave as individuals or as part of a community. So I'm going to wind down a little bit, but he has some other things to say. For example, actually, this is from another source. I found this in a publication from the Stanford Center on Longevity. No age group today is doing better than they did 10 years ago. Talking about not a particular socioeconomic group, I'm talking about an age group. When you take an age group in our population, no one is doing better than they did 10 years ago. Millennials are today carrying 5 times the debt load that students did in the 1990s. 5 times the debt load. And we are partly responsible for that. So what we're trying to do is get you out of here as soon as we can. Only 62% of Americans today own their home, down from 67%. 5%, that is a huge drop, a huge, huge drop. So where are we at this? And social media, and you know, I'm sure if you follow the literature a little bit, we really don't know what the impact of social media is on our relationships. What longevity research has established over and over again, that it is the social relationship that is the connective tissue that keeps you into old age in a healthy fashion. If you want to live long and happy, it is totally dependent on the relationships that you've cultivated in your immediate environment. But social media appear to erode that. Now, it's too early to make any conclusions, but clearly, these are things that we need to be aware of. So it is not all beautiful and exciting and innovative. There are really important things happening in our society that challenge our assumptions about the impact of media. So in sum, I think that media research must be holistic. It cannot just be quantitative. It cannot just be qualitative. One thing that I've always encouraged students to do is to take a case study approach. Vacuum up everything there is to find about your subject, okay? There are annual reports if you want to look at a particular organization. There are annual reports. If you look at a particular demographic, the United Nations publishes a ream of reports every year. I use them for a book that I wrote a couple of years ago. The US government produces data to an astonishing degree. Vacuum up everything in the context, as I've shown you in this little presentation, because it is the context that will truly inform and give you the essence of the meaning of what we're after. So as Silverman says, this is a great book, Qualitative Research by David Silverman, published by Sage. Media research requires a multidisciplinary approach. It requires a multidisciplinary approach because the research in media and technology touches on so many things in our human condition. It's the visual perception, it's the conditioning, it's the motifs, the DNA, and our immediate social and political and economic framework. And to do that, you must be able to look at your topic from a multidisciplinary approach. And then, of course, there are multiple theories that I work with in some of the dissertations I've been involved with. There's Albert Bandura, social learning theory, which a lot of people are using right now to look at social media. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure these are all pretty familiar to you. Our behavior is conditioned by a pyramid of escalating needs, and narrative and expression, of course, self-actualization is part of that. Transportation theory, I just finished 3 dissertations with students that were based on transportation theory, the idea that if you interact with media, you sort of become transported into the story and your connectivity to your current reality is dissolved as you immerse yourself in the alternate reality. And finally, the cultivation theory of Gerbner, who says that when you're exposed to a particular media construct, for example, a TV serial, for a long period of time, you begin to accept those characters as real beings, and you begin to use them as models for your own behavior. These are just some of the typical theoretical domains that my students have used in pursuing media. Whatever it is, folks, as you go forward, and if you're interested in this, we can chat a little bit more in the afternoon breakout session, but whatever it takes, media and technology requires a holistic approach that takes into account the complexity and the unity of the human being. Thanks so much.